first and foremost, thanks for taking the time to speak with Movers and Shakers Unlimited.
Course.
I'll start first by asking how that involvement with this project all started.
So I have two agents based in the UK, and they had met the Red Rock production, Red Rock Films production company, I think a couple of years back. And for some reason, they remember my work a year after, when they were actually actively looking for composers for the series. And yeah, it just worked out. And I was initially, I think they were looking to have multiple composers for the show, so one composer per episode, for example. And I ended up doing everything. So I felt very grateful for that.
Awesome. Now, with that being said, what I find always find fascinating in any discipline that you're talking about, whether it's composing or cinematography, is the approach that's used. And is that approach the same from project to project, or if it evolves from project to project? So can you speak to that, and as to if that process is still the same whenever you're tackling a project, or if it was different this go around?
I think it was slightly different. I mean, every project is very different, but I kind of always have the same process, which is to basically, the first time I see the pictures, the first time I have them on my screen, I have my piano with me, and I just try things around, not necessarily like building melodies or building the score, but just throwing ideas, at what I'm seeing, because I want my music to be reflected, to be a reflect of how I felt the first time I seen the pictures, the same way the audience, is being, hit by the pictures the first time. So that's usually how I do it. And it's never final. It's really just a couple of ideas that that I work on like that, just to the pictures. And in that specific case, it was hard for me not to be, not to think of this score for the movie The Big Blue, which is a movie back in the 80s.
For sure, yeah.
Yes, and and also as a French, person, probably was very, very much influenced by this score when I was a kid. And I would remember the score by Eric Serra, that was, these whale sounds recreated out of synthesizers. That they're not real, whale sounds. And I have this vivid memory of it. And I kind of wanted to do the same. We had to be very careful, obviously, because there were already a lot of sounds, going on. The whale sounds, the different, communication features. And so I had to be very cautious not to overstep, the original sound design and the natural sounds. But I really wanted to be able to play around with that, because I think, like, as a composer, it's hard to ignore it, and it's really tempting.
Absolutely. And speaking further, just about that discipline in and of itself, and I find, obviously, in the most effective ones, whether you're talking about, music, whether we're talking about the picture that we're seeing on the screen, is being able to tell a story with it. And the best ones are able to do it. Even if you place like the particular project on mute, you can still have follow along with the story. Or if we take the dialogue away, with the music, we can kind of still get a feel for what's going on. Now, I find with this project, it provides a unique challenge. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but at least when you're dealing with actors, you're able to see the emotion that is on their face, so it kind of gives you hints and clues as to how to approach the music, or elevate it. And it's a little trickier. Not to say that the animals don't have emotions, they do, but you have to try a little harder to be able to capture that, or to be able to enhance that. So can you talk about that challenge of providing that for the animals that we have in this story, versus dealing with actors or people?
Mhm. like fictions. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's interesting because I worked on both fiction and documentaries, and to me, it's kind of the same that's, going on, at least from a creative process perspective. Um, you said it, as long as there is a story to tell, there are emotions, whether it comes from, an animal or a human being. It's, to me, it's the same. But I would add that, especially with that show, it was particularly the case because I think that one thing that this show is really aiming to do, and succeeds, in my opinion, to do
Yes.
wonderfully, is to make us as human beings feel more related to these animals. And there is so much going on, culturally, that makes us feel like we're similar. And for example, there is this moment when this mother, carries her dead baby for
Yes.
days, as orcas
Yes.
do. And I was a new mother myself back then when I scored it. And to be honest, I think I could relate to this animal and to the scene probably much, much more than any fiction scene, any fiction, that would like show an actor in it. So I think it is very different. It maybe also depends on the documentary that we're talking about, but this one specifically, to me, was very relatable, and it was so easy because it was so inspiring to convey emotions through music.
Awesome. And in the same way, can you also speak to trying to find that balance as well? Because a lot of times it can be very easy for music to kind of overpower what
Yeah.
the other elements that are there. I mean, there's a terrific narrator that you have with the story. So being able to balance all of those different elements and making sure that while it still has a life of its own, or a breath of its own, so to speak, still allowing those other facets or those other elements still to have their space.
It is a very good question, because that was maybe, that was the very, very one of the biggest challenge, for me, when scoring for the show, because I think that it's kind of like, there's a paradox, right? Because you have this wall-to-wall music. There's very, very little, pause. It's like it's almost constant. And you have to be epic, because the images, like most of the time, are pretty epic, and you have to top that, through your music.
For sure.
So there's this challenge of like keeping it epic, but still giving a lot of space and a lot of room for the pictures, the sound design, the narration. So that was a big challenge. And I think that a couple of, like, not a couple of times, like a lot of times, I did more, because it's always kind of, easier to pare down, instead of like, adding more and adding more, and get lost in limbo, in the mixing and stuff. So like a few times, we agreed with the production, like, okay, this is a little too much, so let's just pare it down a little bit. uh but yeah, that was definitely a challenge.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Very welcome. Thanks for
Look
having me.
forward to checking out more of your work. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, friend. I appreciate
All
it.
right. Bye bye.
Bye.